Hello everyone, I'm back today with another short video to talk to you about your Spector pullover progress. I had a couple of questions about working the fade sequence while you're doing the other parts of separating the body from the sleeves. So while this is not truly a technical video and that I'm not going to be knitting anything for you, I did want to hopefully give you some helpful hints that will explain the pattern to make it a little bit more clear. So if you take a look at page 4 of your pattern, after you've worked the remaining short rows on the back, there's a section that says start fade or gradient sequence. So one thing to note here is that depending on your size, the size that you've chosen to make, you may work more or less of the gradient instructions that Hohi gives you. So the first set moves you from color 1, which is the color you started with here at the top, to working this fade, adding in color 2. And then from here you work a plain section in color 2, and then you work your next set of gradients. Now the instructions on page 4 walk you through working this gradient sequence, which is the same whether you're going from color 1 in adding color 2 or whether you're going from color 2 to add color 3. It's the same sequence. You're working a greater or lesser number of plain rounds in between the fade or gradient sections. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that the instructions that she's giving you at the bottom of page 4 that talk about this fade sequence are going to go all the way from here, where the yoke single color ends, all the way through your second color and your third color and into your fourth color. So you're only going to, again, depending on your size, use part of the gradient sequence that she's got written out where you fade from color 1 to color 2. I would highly recommend making a note on that section so that you remember which round you've stopped on when you divide your sleeves off, because you'll want to start that same round when you begin working your sleeves so that these will match up. It's not the end of the world if it isn't perfect, but if you just make yourself a little note to say start on this round using color 2, for instance, then you'll know exactly how to do your sleeves and both your sleeves will match. So just a way to help keep mental track of things, because you're going to work the entire body before you go back and work the sleeves. Okay. The next tidbit that you'll need to be thinking about is the instructions that then move on to page 5. So you're going to go ahead and start your gradient fade based on the instructions on page 4. And you'll see then it'll tell you on page 5 at the very top, it says to work an established pattern, which is your purl 5 knit 1 ribbing, because you're working this on the exterior right now, for X number of rounds, and it's anywhere from 2 to 20. You'll already also be working the color sequence, meaning the rounds where you've begun to shift from color 1 to color 2. So you can see here on mine, and I believe it was the 3rd size. I've worked, here's the plain white, here's where it starts to add in color 2 where I'm alternating rounds, and this right here is where I have divided the body and sleeves. So I've broken, if you will, that color sequence about, not quite halfway, but almost, down this repeat pattern to shift from color 1 to color 2. So you'll want to read through the instructions on pages 4 and 5 so you understand that you're going to be working the fade at one time, and at the same time, at one point, depending on your size, you will then also move the sleeves onto scrap yarn and continue working the body in the gradient sequence that you've already established. So it's kind of like rubbing your head and patting your stomach, or vice versa, at the same time. The other piece of information that you want to look at fairly closely is the fact that she tells you when dividing for the body and sleeves, the rib pattern is not continuous under the arms for most sizes. And what she means by that is she wants you to continue working in this ribbing pattern that you've already established, but be aware that when you add stitches in under the armpits, okay, so for mine, for the size that I knit, it did wind up working out correctly on this side. However, this side has slightly more purl stitches underneath this armpit because of how the numbers worked out. This is never going to be noticeable to anybody, or if it is, they're standing way too close to you. But you can see this is actually the beginning of the round because there's a slight jog in where the color shifts happen. And this is totally okay. Most people do not stand with their arms up above their heads so that people can look at the side seam of their sweater. So you will never notice, I believe there's 2 extra stitches in here. I think this is 7 stitches as opposed to 5. It's noticeable, I think, because I pointed it out to you, but it will not be noticeable when you are wearing this sweater. So just be aware of the fact that in those stitches in the underarms, and again, this is going to depend on your size, there may be a different number of stitches in the underarm section for this ribbing than there are with the rest of the body. And this is okay. Continue working the body in the rib that you've set up with the Purl 5 Knit 1 while you continue working your fade. The last little bit of information talks to you about the fact that at one point, and it's after you've finished doing all of the placing the stitches on holders and you're just working on the body from here on out, she has you basically begin to work the ribbing on the wrong side, so you have less stitches to purl. Now, first off, if you love purling, you don't need to necessarily do that. It will not hurt anything to continue purling 5 and knitting 1. A lot of people don't like to purl, and if that's you, then what will happen is when you come around to, in this case, the new end of the round that she's instructed you on right here, you're then going to, instead of continuing on as you've been knitting, you've been coming around this way, here's the end of the round, you would continue on in that way. Stop at your beginning of the round marker and flip your work so it's now inside out. So you will now have this part of your sweater facing you. And instead of continuing around on the outside in this direction, you will now be on the inside and you will be ready to continue on back in that direction. So you're going to go back for this first round over the stitches that you just finished stitching. And yes, it will leave a little bit of a hole here, but since that's in your underarm, you can graft that together when you join the sleeves and the body and do that last little bit of finishing, and it won't be noticeable. So this way of working will mean that you can then knit 5, purl 1. So when you come back and you've worked all the stitches around on the inside of your garment, you will be back to over here at your beginning of the round marker. Now you will want to continue on in this direction, knitting down on the inside, if you will, of the sweater. So hopefully that makes some sense, and that hopefully those tips and tricks will be a little bit easier for you to get yourself oriented in space. This portion where we've got the body and the sleeves getting divided off at the same time that we're still dealing with working the gradient or the fade section can be a little bit confusing. So if you run into any trouble at all, please grab me a Ravelry group or a Ravelry message, and I will be glad to try to walk you through some of the steps if I can, long distance. And if I can't, I will be glad to put some stitches on the needle and shoot another short technical video, because chances are good if you have a question, someone else does too. Okay, so that should get you guys set to work through the body and most of the sleeves. When I come back next time, it's probably going to be 2 weeks. I will give you some tips and tricks on finishing up the ribbing and getting that cast off with a stretchy bind off. So happy knitting. I hope everybody is staying safe and well. Take care.